Okay, so thank you everyone for attending and showing up for the Accessibility Accelerator. As I've mentioned earlier, which was not recorded, my name is Kayla Carter. I'm the Accessibility Coordinator for Xenia Concerts. I'm really excited to be sharing about this really wonderful project. Throughout this info session for the next hour or so, I will be sharing a lot of information about the Accessibility Accelerator. And of course, should you have any specific questions at the end, please feel free to let me know. And I'll be able to answer a lot of those questions. So, of course, in the name of accessibility and adaptations, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I previously sent an email with the agenda items, but this is also something that I just wanted to put up as a point of reference just as we get started today. So for our land acknowledgements are incredibly important, as I'm sure we all know, but especially with regards to a lot of the themes, a lot of the considerations, but at the core of the Accessibility Accelerator, we will be speaking about accessibility, but creating a more dynamic understanding of that, and really pulling out the frames of accessibility to create a more dynamic and intersectional understanding of what accessibility is. So though we are starting with the land acknowledgement, understandings of the land that we're on, historically and currently Indigenous ways of teaching and learning and knowing, and our relationship to the land will be a huge part of not only the accelerator, but also the resources that do come out of it, by virtue of making sure that we are as accessible as possible, and that we have a very broad understanding of who will be attending our concerts, but also where our concerts exist, and also with the knowledge that we are doing a lot of this work on the land that we are currently on. Xenia Concerts, Inc. is based in what is now known as Toronto to Toronto, on the homelands of the Huron-Wendat First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory was subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and Xenia Concerts is grateful to have the opportunity to work in community on this territory. So, as I'm sure all of you are aware of, Xenia Concerts has been doing a lot of really amazing work, and each of you in your own way, by virtue of either our team or even if it's just by attending some of our concerts, has been able to get a bit of an understanding of who Xenia Concerts is. However, I do think it's important, especially because this is giving you some information about who you'll be working with, the organization you'll be working with, just to have a bit of an understanding of what are our missions, our vision, and our values. So the mission, Xenia Concerts, Inc., works with neurodiversity and disabled communities to design, produce, and present exceptional performing arts experiences for children, their families, and others within those communities who face systemic and social barriers to inclusion. The vision to serve as Canada's leading resource for the creation and promotion of family-friendly, accessible, and inclusive performing arts experiences for neurodiverse and disabled audiences through professional training, productions, and presentations. I'm going to stop here just to give you a bit more context and also to gloat a bit about why I love the organization that I work with. One of the really huge things that I love about Xenia Concerts, and is also one of the things that really blends very well into why we're doing the Accessibility Accelerator, is that Xenia Concerts has an understanding and has had a history of doing work within neurodiversity and disability. But at the core of it, we also understand that this is work that needs to be done by not only artists, but also arts organizations across Canada within our province. And also, I think it should just be a standard. So a huge part of the reason why we are doing the Accessibility Accelerator is to not only really reframe and build upon our current understandings of what accessibility and accommodations, and most importantly, adaptations look like with regards to disability and neurodiversity within art spaces, but also to make sure that collectively we are doing this work together. And that's something that's really, really important for us. Our values: enrichment, inclusion, excellence, community, and sustainability. These are really, really important values to have. And to be quite honest with you, these values were things that really made me excited to be part of this organization, because these are all things that are really, really necessary when we are thinking about what can accessibility within art spaces look like. And then more importantly, what can that look like from the point of view and from the direction of folks who are neurodiverse and or disabled as well. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to jot them down anywhere. And then by the time we're wrapped up today, I'll be able to answer them as quickly as I can. So what is the Accessibility Accelerator? The Accessibility Accelerator is something that has been in the works for a good amount of time. We are now in the process of launching it. But at the core of the Accelerator, it's a launching pad for a more inclusive and accessible future in the Canadian performing arts. And this is a bit of a huge umbrella and a bit of a huge undertaking, but it's actually something that Xenia Concerts feels especially prepared to be able to take on. Another really important thing about the Accessibility Accelerator is the fact that the motive and the intention and at the core of the Accessibility Accelerator is to get 4 to 6 co-designers who have lived experience as being neurodiverse and being disabled as well. And the reason why this was such a crucial thing for us was because there are very few times when neurodiverse folks, when disabled folks are able to be the ones creating and making the decisions about what accessibility, what adaptations, and what accommodations can look like for them. So this is part of the reason why this project is actually really, really exciting for me, because in a lot of ways, it's actually about how can we create a very diverse panel of experts, especially when we consider that neurodivergent folks, disabled folks who are working in the arts are actually experts in what accessibility can look like, because each of us have our own very specific understanding of what accessibility can be and what accommodations and adaptations can be. But also, I think it's really important to make sure that we are being paid and we are being valued for our work. We will definitely get to the compensation part soon enough, because that is absolutely something that's very important as well. This project, by the time that it's done, will culminate in recommendations on how to improve accessibility at Xenia concerts and other events, as well as further development of Xenia's artist training program. The artist training program is actually something that's really, really important, because it also gives and provides a lot of knowledge and literacy for a lot of artists who want to create more accessible spaces within their own artist practice as well. And this is something that actually allows for more growth. And also, once again, going back to one of our values, the sustainability of accessibility within the arts, within Canada, and also I think abroad as well. We also intend to develop resources that support neurodivergent and disabled artists in navigating the professional world. So as much as this will be a program that's really important for disseminating more information and developing a more concrete practice, yet growing practice of what accessibility can be and what that can look like and adaptations can look like, there also needs to be an acknowledgement that for a lot of neurodiverse and also for a lot of disabled folks, trying to get resources to support their own practice and development within the professional world is actually something that's really quite hard to do. Not because it's not possible, but because the resources more often than not do not exist. And if they do exist, they don't always exist in ways that are accessible for us. And then they also don't exist in ways where we are at the center of how it was meant to be created in general, which is another huge reason why making sure that the panelists that we do have, the co-designers that we have for this are people who have lived experience as being neurodivergent and also being disabled as well. The outputs for this will also be including webinars, a guidebook, accessible web-based resources, and online discussions. This is also really crucial, and I will get into this a bit more, that each of the kinds of resources that we do put out, that they're accessible to all different kinds of people who do need to engage with this. So understanding that, yes, a guidebook may work for some, however, accessible web-based resources may work for a lot of people as well. So why are we doing the Accessibility Accelerator? So the Accessibility Accelerator, like I mentioned, has been a long time in the works, but at the core of it, a lot of the reasoning behind doing it was an understanding that the disabled and neurodiversity community within the arts, and also I would push to say audiences as well, deserve a lot more from the Canadian arts field in general. A lot of, as I've shown here, a lot of the statistics that have been done and a lot of the work that's been done to document those statistics around not only engagement of disabled and neurodivergent folks within the arts, but also the experience of neurodivergent and disabled artists as well, to be quite frank, is not where it should be and is actually incredibly disappointing. And though a lot of this, a lot of the statistics that I'm showing right now are a couple of years old, regardless, there is still so much integral work that needs to be done. And to be honest, this is also work that will continue to be ongoing. Something that the team at Xenia really understands is that accessibility, the moment that you think that you have it all figured out, is going to continue to grow. And that's also part of the reason why the accelerator is so important, because we have an understanding that accessibility and adaptations is not a stagnant thing. It's actually something that needs to be growing constantly and be as dynamic as the needs of people who are engaging with the arts, but also for artists as well. As a disability-focused organization that has a strong relationship with community stakeholders, artists, and fellow art organizations, Xenia Concerts is in a strong position to reduce barriers to inclusion for members of the disability and neurodiversity community in audience, on stage, and within the operations of our organization. Part of the reason why I wanted to read out this last part is because it really touches on the fact that the work of the Accessibility Accelerator is not just about what is the design of your venues or in what ways can you be more accessible. It's actually about what are the experiences in a very intentional way for audiences. What are the experience in an intentional way and in a thorough way for artists who are neurodivergent and or disabled, and also the operations. For some of us here, we are neurodivergent and or disabled. And I'll say it for myself, I have been able to be in spaces, very fortunate to be in spaces where the audience experience may be accessible and the stage experience is accessible But once it gets down to the operations, I'm like, you lost me. And this is unfortunately a very common experience for a lot of people who are neurodivergent and or disabled who are working within the arts. And this is part of the reason why the accelerator is so important, because we really are focused on looking at all of the different parts and sides and the facets of what does accessibility, what does intersectionality, and also what do adaptations look like for the experience of, once again, not just concert goers, of not just the audience, of not just performers and people on stage, but also arts workers in general. This is something that's really, really important. And especially if we are going to be creating resources that are really going to be focused towards folks who are disabled and or are neurodivergent, there also needs to be an understanding that your engagement with the arts is not going to be exclusively with regards to you being an audience member or working on stage, that your experience and work within the arts, even if it's within production, even if it's with doing admin work or being a staff, that work also needs to be accessible as well. Additionally, something else that, like I've mentioned before, with regards to accessibility in this program specifically, and a huge reason why we wanted to do this in general, is making sure that we are establishing a new standard. And part of wanting to establish that new standard is that we want to make sure that disabled and neurodivergent folks are the ones who have the say in what that standard is, because they and we are going to be the ones who are mostly affected by that standard. Something that I always say in my work inside and outside of Xenia concerts is that for a lot of us, we can tell when something has been made for us, but not by us. And the Accessibility Accelerator is really about making sure that it's being created for us, but also by us, so that we can really get the nuances of accessibility and adaptations that can oftentimes fall through the gaps when things aren't being done based on our lived experience, or we don't have the input based on our lived experience as well. The Accessibility Accelerator process. So this is a huge key part of not just the accelerator, but also the end results of everything. So like I mentioned before, this is a co-design process. So the co-design process will be deeply rooted in making sure that we are all working together, making sure that we are doing research together, making sure that there is resource production that is done together. This is a process that has been in the works and has been used in a lot of different ways, but we're really excited to bring this co-design process, and we will be using a lot of different variations of it and a lot of different practices into this process, because like I mentioned before, making sure that we are being as thorough about getting people's ideas as possible and making sure that people feel heard is not just going to be the cornerstone of the process, but is actually about how we make sure that the entire process is accessible. So the first phase will be research. So taking the time to figure out, what are we going to be focusing on? Why is this important to us? What can each of us bring? How do we take those ideas and really do additional research and provide you with that research so that you feel as equipped as possible? Then after we do the research, we have a better understanding of what directions we want to go in based on which demographic that we're including, making sure that we're covering all of our bases. Then we will move into ideation. And ideation for me, as somebody who has a history of doing co-design work, is one of my favorite parts, because ideation really does allow us the room for a bit more play, for us to be able to say, like, let's actually throw some ideas out there. Let's try to be as innovative as possible. What things can we impart into this? What experiences have we had through our own processes of being arts workers? what things can we do that we may have never seen before, or may have been told like, that's not going to work. Ideation is the process where we can actually say, let's see what happens. So that's something that's really, really exciting for me with regards to ideation. And then phase 3 is prototype revisions and testing. So this is also a part that is really exciting for me. If you can't tell, I'm very excited about this entire program. But this part is also really exciting for me, primarily because this is the part where we get to sculpt and mold and really carve away at what do the results of this look like. And we get to build on the past 2 phases as well. The prototype revisions and testing really do allow us to be able to create something very, very tangible. And I'll say for myself, as somebody who's neurodivergent, ideation is great. However, the prototype revisioning and testing is really the point where I get to say, oh, this is actually coming to life in a really specific way, but also this is the space where the input, our design, being as upfront and straightforward as possible is really going to help us create a product and have a resource that allows us to make something that we're really proud of, but also something that will be deeply helpful to not just us as a group of co-designers, but also to people in general. And this is also part of the reason why being able to have the lived experience of neurodivergent and disabled arts workers is really important, because this is part of the way that we get to say, hey, this actually, I don't know if this will really work for X, Y, and Z reason. Or we can say, hey, actually, let's maybe add this in because I think it'd be a really, really great tool for not only being able to address a lot of issues, but also to help people at whatever point they're at as well. Xenia Concerts is deeply dedicated to a thorough and transparent process of co-design. With this in mind, we will be prioritizing not rushing the process and utilizing various forms of idea tracking, innovative co-design tools, and a variety of research and problem-solving tools. This is something that's really, really important for me. I will also get into this in our next slide, but something that I find oftentimes happens with co-design processes is that there's this sort of rush with things just to get to a final product. And I understand that we have time crunches and those things are definitely things to take into consideration. However, with the process of rushing things, a lot of things can get missed. And this is something that's really important because it's covering a base that I think in a lot of ways still has so much more room to really cover. This is part of the reason why we really don't want to rush this process. And we will get into the timing a bit later on in our slides. But it's really important that we're not rushing this process. It's really important that this process is deeply about how can we cover all of our bases, lift up every sort of inaccessible rock and figure out what's underneath there and really get to the crevices of what we really mean when we're thinking about accessibility, when we're thinking about inclusion, and ultimately when we're also thinking about adaptations as well. With this in mind, not only do we not want to rush things, but we also want to make sure that the tools that we're using for co-design are accessible as well, and also allow us to have a really thorough process that is also really nourishing and sparks ideas as well. And also having problem-solving tools. This is something that's really, really important. So much of co-design is addressing a problem and standing and existing in front of an issue that feels to be quite daunting sometimes. So being able to really implement problem-solving tools that feel supportive at every step of the way, but also, as I've mentioned before, each of these things are going to be things that we keep adding on to as well. So this is something that I also wanted to make sure that I brought up as well. And then additionally, which is a great segue into our next slide, I approach this in all of my work, and Xenia as a team is so iconic as usual for approaching all of this from an understanding of the fact that one design does not fit all. So when we are thinking about program accessibility and engagement, it's really important that though we are creating a program and we are going to be creating resources and tools and webinars and resources that are really centering accessibility and inclusion and intersectionality and adaptations, the process also needs to be accessible as well, right? So this is part of the reason why program accessibility is really important. So a huge thing that I always mention, and something that was at the core of even designing the program in general, was understanding that Zoom may not be the most accessible way for everyone to engage and give feedback or communicate or give their ideas on this project. And that's okay. It would be completely counterintuitive if we were to only provide one means of being able to engage with this process while also saying that we want to do a lot of work around accessibility. So with that in mind, a huge part of this entire program, and especially at the beginning, will really be about how are we setting a standard for what accessibility looks like for each of us individually, and how are we as the Xenia design team meeting each of you where you're at, while also understanding that our needs change from moment to moment, and that they're not contradictory to each other in any way. We understand that accessibility and adaptations look different for everyone, and that accessibility, like I said, is not one size fits all. Additionally, I think also it's really important that when we are thinking of feedback, this is a huge area of inaccessibility sometimes in programs that do exist in general, where feedback is sort of given in a like, you have your one window and that's it. And if you didn't give the feedback, then we've moved on. With this process, it's really important that the undercurrent of the entire program is that of, we really want your feedback at any point, and not just on the design, not just in each of the phases, but actually about your experience in the overall accelerator in general. So this also looks like throughout the program, we will have implementing specific points for check-ins, right? Additionally, I should also mention, I'll be the one who will be doing a lot of the work with the people who are co-designers. But something that I will also establish is room for people to give anonymous feedback. It requires a lot of trust to give honest feedback, especially when you're working with a new team. So being able to establish that is something that is really, really important for me. And also leaving a lot of room for people to say, hey, can we also implement this as a form of accessibility? Because this is actually something that I need in order to participate in a greater way. But also, like I mentioned, it's really important for us to understand that accessibility is something that is growing and is not stagnant. So your whatever needs you may have or adaptations that you are absolutely entitled to at the beginning may look very different from phase to phase, or even from month to month as well. Something else that I wanted to address, which is just a general question, was what opportunities are there for adults and artists looking to secure themselves in the professional field? This is a really, really great question. So for me, at least, it's really important to create a very dynamic understanding of program accessibility. And that also means taking into consideration the inaccessibility that a lot of disabled and neurodivergent artists experience just in general. And unfortunately, due to that inaccessibility, that means that opportunities do not always look the same for us. And should we even have access to some opportunities, it's very hard to engage with those things. So also part of creating this program is also about building community. Building community is a huge way. It's a huge form of inaccessibility, but also a huge way for us to develop our skills professionally, but also to gain more opportunities based on our own specific networks. Something else that I think is really important, especially for me as somebody who will be facilitating a lot of the sessions that we do have, is really helping folks understand what are the areas that you may want to work in, and doing the work that I can within the resources that I have to be able to at least say, here's a resource that I can think of. Here is something that we can actually implement into our entire program that will not only be a great final product, but is also something that will be beneficial to all of you. And it really does bring me back to my point of the fact that this is a program that is really going to be for us and by us. So even throughout the process of creating these really wonderful resources, and being able to have things like guidebooks and accessible online resources, it's also important that throughout this process, you're able to get a better understanding of the ways in which you can engage in the professional field, or anyone can, if that's something that they're looking for as well. Okay, who is the ideal candidate? So the people that we are looking for we are seeking neurodivergent, capital D, deaf, and or disabled arts workers to act as co-designers. So this actually means that we want people who have the lived experience of being neurodivergent and or capital D, deaf, and or disabled to be the co-designers. And like I've mentioned before, part of the reason why this is really important, and part of the reason why the Accessibility Accelerator is really innovative, is because it's a opportunity, but also it's a huge area for us to be able to take up space to say, we are actually speaking about our own experiences. We don't need people to speak on our behalf. We actually are very well versed in our own experiences, and that is what we would like to share. And that is actually the design that we needed to be working around. Once again, it needs to be for us and designed by us. The capacity to work with others and take into consideration lived experiences outside of our own. This is a huge thing. There's an inherent responsibility with being a co-designer, especially on a project like this, because it really requires us to understand the validity and the importance of our own lived experiences, while also taking into consideration the lived experiences of people and also places that we may not even take into consideration. So an example that I will use, and something that we even took into consideration with regards to this entire process, but also references back to the Accessibility Accelerator accessibility, is that we also understand that not everybody may have access to a computer to be able to engage for a lot of reasons, whether that be class, whether that be based on where you live, whether that be based on just accessibility to a computer and that sort of thing. We don't want that to be a deterrent. However, as co-designers, we want you to be able to think of that. And if that's not something that may be in your wheelhouse, at least be open to developing that skill and practice as well. A strong passion for creating and developing a more dynamic understanding of accessibility within the arts in Canada. This is something that's really exciting for me. I am an accessibility and adaptations and in general disability justice nerd, but also being an artist for most of my life, being able to merge these things together is something that's really, really exciting as well. And being able to work with people who have a passion for those things is also something that would make an ideal candidate, and somebody who's really at the end of the day very excited about the potential for what accessibility can look like within the arts in Canada. the capacity to participate in at least 80% of the allotted time commitments of the project. I'm going to go a bit more into the expectations and the timing of the role. Part of the reason why we do this is to make sure that everybody has enough room for input. And like I mentioned, everybody's communication style can be different, but it's actually about like making sure that you're participating so that we do get your voice heard within this process, because it's incredibly important as well. And an eagerness and excitement about the potential for growth and innovation in accessibility. Of course, this is a co-design process, but also the eagerness and the excitement about trying out a lot of different and really cool ways to engage with accessibility, and also to carve out more room for accessibility. And all of these things work together to create a really great candidate for our co-designers, because at the core of it, we really want neurodivergent and capital D deaf and disabled artists to be able to have the room and expansiveness to be able to take up space that is often left vacant for us. This is a way for us to be able to take up space in really intentional ways, where we get to be at the center of things as well. Okay, so expectations of the role. So these co-designers, the 4 to 6 co-designers that we do choose, will work together with the Xenia design team, which will be myself, which will be Rory, and also with input from Evan and Paolo as well. So the first is identifying unaddressed barriers to inclusion in the design of concert experiences at Xenia concerts and other pre-existing concert designs. So this is, I'll say for me, for my autistic brain, this is part of the stuff that I love because it's very concrete and very straightforward. So this is part of the expectations of the role, is really being able to pinpoint what are the unaddressed barriers. And yes, of course, we collectively know about a lot of unaddressed barriers, but this is also another example why being able to have neurodivergent, capital D deaf, and disabled arts workers be a part of this process is because based on our lived experiences, we have a very specific ability to be able to pinpoint the nuances of inaccessibility that can go overlooked so often. Develop design principles for how to incorporate accessibility into art events at all levels and stages of development. So once again, like I mentioned before, this isn't just about audience members. This is not just about artists. This is also about people who are working within arts organizations, making sure that we're covering all of our bases for the lived experience of arts workers, regardless of what title you hold and regardless of your level of engagement as well. Develop resources that help artists and arts organizations create accessible experiences that support the needs of disabled and neurodivergent attendees and artists. So like I mentioned, this is very, very crucial to be able to have a tangible takeaway, to be able to say like, this is a guide in a lot of ways that you can use, not just with regards to your venue design, but also like, how are we curating and how are we making the experience accessible for so many neurodivergent and disabled folks, for capital D deaf folks as well. Our experiences are so pivotal to our engagement, to how we develop community, but also just how we exist in those spaces. And this is also something that requires a level of nuance that I'm really excited to cultivate more of, and also learn about and be able to document and create more resources around based on our experiences. So often our experiences are sort of glossed over because there's this attention constantly to the structural design, as opposed to understanding that the structural design and our experiences in these spaces are so deeply linked. Develop resources to support neurodivergent and disabled artists in navigating the professional arts world. Once again, I think it's really, really important that though this will be about how are we impacting and informing and also changing the landscape for accessibility within the arts in general, but also making sure that we are turning back inward, but also collectively to neurodivergent and disabled artists and saying, here are some really tangible ways that you can navigate the professional art world with an understanding that a lot of the engagement, a lot of the frameworks don't really work for us because they weren't created with us in mind, but were more created to address inaccessibility. Another question that was asked before was how much work will you need to be doing outside of meeting times? This is a really, really great question, and it actually goes back to program accessibility. So for a lot of neurodivergent folks, for a lot of disabled folks, I will say for myself, I hate homework. I've never liked it. I've never been good at it. I've always disliked it. So much, a lot of the work in air quotes that will be needing to be done outside of meeting times will not be the kind of work that requires very strong deliverables, will not be work that requires very strong due dates, because to be honest, that sort of work does not work for most of us. And this process is really about garnering and fostering accessibility, but also collectively allowing us to be very rooted in this process without feeling as though we're working up against or working in a way that really does not work for a lot of us. So when we're considering work, some of the takeaways or any of the work that may need to be done may actually be just with regards to, can you come back to our next meeting thinking of a way to provide a resource that would be really exciting for you to engage in? So it's not going to be so much like, we need 5 to 10 bullet points. It's more so like, just come back with an idea and we'll take it from there. And that's something that's really, really important to us in this process. All right, so time commitment and rate of pay. So this program will start, the Accelerator will start monthly. So for 2-hour meetings starting September 2023, and that will go until January 2025. There will also be scheduled breaks in between each of the phases because it's really important, and we do not need to be fostering burnout. Once again, we do not need to create an inaccessible process to learn more and to create more accessibility and adaptations as well. This is a part-time position. So like I mentioned, we will be meeting monthly for 2 hours and then at an hourly rate of $60. Also, it's really important to know that outside of the meeting times, there may just be some communication with regards to emails, and that will be compensated as well. And I will be able to meet with you all should you end up being in the program or should you apply, to be able to document that with you as well. Also, if you end up being selected for an interview, we are going to compensate you for your time. This is a new thing that has happened, which I'm really, really happy about, primarily because your time is precious and you are also taking the time out of your lives to be able to meet with us. But that is also time to do an interview with us that has been informed by your experiences that you've had, that you would be bringing to the interview as well. And also, let's be completely honest, this time that you would not be working or being able to generate an income for yourself. So that's something that's also really, really important to keep in mind as well. All right, an application format and how to apply. So this is also a huge thing around accessibility as well. We understand that application processes are historically not accessible. I can't tell you how many times, just because I've been burnt out, the process is inaccessible, that I may not apply for a certain position. So with that in mind, there are multiple ways that you would be able to apply for this program. So one is a PDF. The other is a video, so that can be MP4, Move and Vimeo link, or a YouTube link as well. And we just ask that the length of time is 10 to 15 minutes max. Just stick it between that amount of time and you're good to go. Also understanding that for some folks, having to record yourself is a lot, and can provide a lot of sensory overload amongst a lot of other things. So also audio is a great way to do that as well. So once again, if it can just be in MP3 format, and if it can be from 10 to 15 minutes max as well. And also, if you can send all applications to Evan Lambert at xeniaconcerts.com, that would be great. Yeah, I really am happy with the ways that we're going to be accepting applications, because there's a lot of ways that you can really share your experiences, and some ways work a lot better for us than others. So it's really important to provide those. Additionally, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to follow up with some YouTube videos on how to create those. They'll be super short because I never want to assume that we all are starting at the same space when it comes to knowledge or understanding of how to do any of these things in general. All right, so we're done just in time. So I'm going to stop the recording right now. Perfect.